So I was scrolling on Instagram after watching the Clippers blow a 3-1 lead, which is, pretty normal nowadays. And I was just enjoying all the memes, and then I stumbled upon a clip. A clip of Max Kellerman, notorious for his terrible takes, which I totally get, he probably just does it for the ratings. But in this clip, he said that Kawhi was a clutcher player than Kobe.
Is Kawhi actually a better player under pressure than the great Kobe Bean Bryant?
Yes, he is. No one had more heart than Kobe.
And yet, that wasn't what got me thinking, because that's just Max being Max. And that's really why I don't really watch First Take all that much, because it's goofy nonsense. But rather, it wasn't until I dove into the Instagram comments where I saw one specific comment that I stopped and stared at for a minute, and it read, "Kobe is overrated, but Kawhi ain't there yet." And in that moment, I shook my head and just hoped that this kid was 18 or under. And then I would probably understand that he just missed out on arguably the greatest decade in NBA history, with the highest number of notable Hall of Famers all playing against one another. But in this decade, there was one player that just dominated the entire league consistently each year, and it wasn't even close who the decade belonged to, and that name was Kobe Bryant. Now, unfortunately, Kobe was drafted in 1996, back when you actually had to earn being considered great in the NBA by being great in the NBA, where now it's been diminished to if you are good in high school or college, you are now next in line to be an NBA Hall of Famer. And although he was acknowledged as the best high school player in the country, all the hype came from the fact that he was the first 17-year-old to make the jump to the NBA, and his father used to play for the 76ers, which got Kobe some props with the media and the fans, but not where it mattered, his coach. Because Kobe started out as a bench warmer for the Lakers, which many people tend to forget. Kobe wasn't getting minutes for shit in his first 2 seasons, and only started a total of 7 games in his 2 seasons.
Kobe Bryant, last night you get your first start as a pro. How'd it feel?
I felt good. Going out, for the starting lineup. I tried to keep a straight face and keep a serious look, but I couldn't help but cracking a little smile.
Do you get a little feel of palpitation?
Sure. Because you're so excited to get out there at the beginning of the game, I haven't done that since high school.
Right.
So I naturally get excited.
And on the 3rd season, during the 98-99 lockout, he was finally bumped up to the starting lineup for the shortened 50-game season. And he was quickly proven that the head coach, Del Harris, was a fucking goofball for not using this kid more. And although Kobe wasn't being used to his fullest, early on there were a few glimpses during interviews and events like the 97 dunk contest, where the media were able to see this god-tier confidence that this kid possessed that was only seen once before in a guy named Michael Jordan, who also turned out to have a pretty decent career. But unfortunately, from Kobe's perspective, he was finally being recognized as the best player on the team. But during the lockout season, the Lakers were finally able to acquire a new asset, just hitting the peak of his prime at 26 years old, Shaquille O'Neal, who just happened to bump 20-year-old Kobe Bryant back down to playing second fiddle. But it ain't all bad, because speaking of MJ, the Lakers finally fired that head coach Del Harris and picked up the Bulls' legendary coach, the Zen Master, Phil Jackson. Now, we all know the duo Shaq and Kobe, even if you weren't a basketball fan, because this Laker team was one of the most iconic in all of sports, and I'm sure there's still some ignorant people out there that thought that Shaq carried Kobe in that era, instead of realizing that it goes 2 ways, that young Kobe wasn't winning without Shaq, and prime Shaq wasn't winning without Kobe. And these two polar opposites of a goofy, sometimes lazy Shaq and a laser-focused, Jordan-esque Kobe were constantly bumping heads, but despite their many differences, the talent took over during games, and they would just bulldoze through everyone and able to win 3 out of 4 NBA Finals. And it's undeniable that if they would have stayed together in 2004, at least 2 more championships could have been won. But like every great team, it came to an end in 2004.
The major headline around the league tonight, the Los Angeles Lakers and Miami Heat have agreed to a trade that will send Shaquille O'Neal, one of the greatest big men of all time, to sunny South Florida.
Remember this? 'Cause I'm going to bring a championship to Miami, I promise.
And at this point, Kobe was just now entering his prime, despite already having a more successful career than 80% of NBA players. Now remember, he didn't just lose Shaq, but his entire Laker team that he won with. At this point, he was playing with famously the worst lineup that the franchise has ever seen, which did tempt Kobe to ask for a trade in 2007, but the trade never came, and after one season of going 10 games under 500, Kobe pretty much displayed the definition of carrying your team every single game and getting the Lakers to a positive record the next year and even a playoff appearance. And mind you, this is still taking place during the greatest Western Conference of all time, so it didn't come easy. And in 2006, his Laker team almost upset the third best team, the Suns, but then ended up blowing a 3-1 lead, unfortunately, which at the time was very rare, but nowadays it's the fucking norm. Luckily though, in 2008, the Lakers were able to acquire Pau Gasol right before the trade deadline, who was nowhere near the league as Shaq, but Kobe was in his prime and unstoppable. So all he really needed was someone not named Kwame Brown. The Lakers also brought back a familiar face to Kobe in Derek Fisher, and now things were looking kinda good. Also, anyone with knowledge of this era of the NBA knows that Kobe was robbed of 2 or 3 MVPs. The NBA decided to give him a 2008 MVP once he had the best record in the NBA. And now that Kobe has some competent players on his team and a top 2 coach of all time in Phil Jackson, it's time to get to the promised land, which they did, making it to the last 3 NBA finals of the decade, going 2 of 3. So, quick recap of this decade of Kobe's Lakers. In a span of 11 seasons, the Lakers were in 7 of the NBA finals and was able to win 5 of them, as well as winning many of those smaller individual awards, which probably meant nothing to Kobe. But I would say it was a very successful decade. But then there was a shift at the start of the 2010s as the Lakers slowly decreased in quality players as all players grew older, as well as Kobe. And some fans and media were expecting Kobe to show his age, but that did not happen. Despite the players around him getting worse, he continued to be an elite player in the league until around 2013. The Lakers had possibly the most disappointing Laker team of all time when they picked up top center in the league Dwight Howard and former 2-time MVP Steve Nash in an attempt to cash in on the big 3 hype of the time that was going on due to the Miami Heat changing the state of the NBA forever, making it extremely popular to make as many super teams as possible.
Not 1, championships.
Not 2.
LeBron, tell us about that.
Not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7. Hey.
But unfortunately, Howard had a bum back due to surgery, and Nash was about 56 years old, and he was supposed to be a prime Chris Paul. Fuck you, David Stern. So this team was bad, real bad, and Kobe was once again trying to carry a whole team to the playoffs as he did 7 years prior. But at this point, he was no spring chicken. So in an attempt to will the Lakers to a win streak and into the playoffs, he unfortunately tore his Achilles with 3 games left in the season, ironically against the Warriors, who would go on to dominate the rest of the decade. And Kobe would go on to miss majority of the next 2 seasons until finally returning in 2015 to play out one final farewell tour with another bum-ass Laker team. But it wasn't even about the season that people remember. It was about that final game on April 13, 2016.
For the final time, number 24 on the floor, 6'6", High School, 5-time world champion, Kobe Bryant.
Where Kobe had the most Kobe-like game imaginable, where he dropped 60 points and brought his team back in the 4th quarter to seal the victory with back-to-back clutch shots and clutch free throws to end an iconic career and remind everybody why he was compared to MJ and why he is the Black Mamba. When it comes to comparisons to Jordan, Kobe is literally the only one that applies, for they had the exact same play style, the same position and moves, as well as that killer work ethic. And where Kobe was a slightly better shooter, Jordan was more fundamentally sound. Now, as for stats, I feel like the only people who look at career stats to make up their view of a player without the context clearly don't know the game of basketball, or they just have some kind of math major. To me, the biggest factor in sports is the player's individual impact on the court or field. When I watch a game, I dictate how someone plays based on their ability to actually play the game of basketball on both ends of the court, and in Kobe's case, he probably had the highest IQ in all of the NBA during his era, and it shows when you simply use your eyes. But when it comes to stat sheet stuffers, all of these records and accolades that the NBA media likes to shove in our faces are all pretty meaningless if it doesn't show results. Because you could get a triple-double and help the team like LeBron, or go nowhere like Westbrook or Harden. Speaking of Harden, he's got to be the worst pure scorer I've ever seen, because there's been top scorers that got nowhere like McGrady, but at least was entertaining to watch, where half of Harden's points comes from flopping and bad calls, and it's just cringy as hell to watch. And back to Westbrook. The NBA interestingly went against their own judging for MVP qualifications, because they like to choose the star of whoever has the best record in the NBA typically, but they gave Westbrook the MVP for having a triple-double, but his OKC team's record was very similar to when Kobe was snubbed because of his team's record. So to me, that's kind of like the equivalent of giving Kobe an MVP just for dropping 81 on the Raptors, but they didn't. So essentially what I'm trying to say is, the NBA went to shit. And another example of the NBA record breaking meaning nothing. Devin Booker ended up scoring 70 points on the Celtics and still fucking lost. And yet, the media still tried to compare it to Kobe's 81 when Kobe literally brought his team back to a victory with his 81 points after being down 20 plus points. So all in all, ESPN stat pandering means fucking nothing. And I encourage you to make your judgment on greatness by using your eyes on the game and not numbers on your phone. On January 26th, 2020, Kobe Bryant and his second daughter Gigi was killed. And it wasn't bad enough that one of my favorite people on this hellish planet died young in one of the worst possible ways, and it took me about 3 to 4 weeks to get used to the idea. And during this time, I understood all the tributes and all the praise for Kobe for like the first 3 months or so. But now I can't fucking stand the fact that everyone on ESPN and YouTube and in my everyday life act like they were fucking Kobe fans since day one. And now that he's fucking dead, people want to acknowledge his greatness. And now I, an actual Kobe fan, since the very first game I ever watched on January 1st, 2010, he is the single reason I've loved basketball for a decade. I've defended him for 10 fucking years against ignorant people. And now I just fall into a pack of people that have been overrun by bandwagon fans who tend to just like whatever the internet tells them to like. For instance, I respect LeBron James as the best point forward in the game, but I do not respect his overall career at all, and I never have, mainly because the media was trying to tell me to like him since the beginning. But even as a fucking preteen, I could see what they were trying to do, and I wasn't going to be manipulated. So if LeBron was to have brain cancer, I'm not all of a sudden gonna jump ship and act like LeBron was my dad and I loved him for my whole life. I'm probably just gonna end up saying, man, that sucks, and end it at that. And that might seem kinda harsh, but it's the truth, and humans need to stop being hypocrites. I'm not really sure how I should end this video, so I'll just say this. Kobe Bryant will never be duplicated, despite what social media tries to sell you. Alright, I'm done.
This is my man. This is Showboat. We call him Showboat, but y'all know him as Kobe Bryant. This is my main man. I feel like a father, though. I mean, this is my boy. I mean, we play together. We sit on the bench by each other. We're always talking. Then when I look at, you know how you go down in the locker room and they list everybody's age, not the age, but their date of birth, and I see 78. And I'm like, I'm twice as old as this kid, you know. But this kid right here, mark my words now, and I said this earlier in the season, it's going to be unbelievable. I mean, and I'm not saying that because he's here. I see him every day in practice.
I'm going to slide him a couple $100 after.
I see him every day in practice. I see how this kid works. I see how he, after practice, how he's still in the gym before practice. I know he goes to Pacific Palisades and shoots in their gym after school. He is just a tremendous talent.